Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Indestructible Data and Targeting Strategies for 2025. I'm Yory Wurmser, and I'm Principal Analyst at eMarketer, covering media, advertising, and technology. We recently published the results of a survey we conducted with Snap in July, and one stat caught my eye. 61.4% of marketers in the survey said that they're looking to augment their measurement strategies with better and faster media mix modeling. We'll cover that in the next 30 minutes, along with Google's cookie non-deprecation and strategies for targeting and measurement for 2025. Joining me are Echo Sandburg, Chief Brand Officer, CP Skin Health Group at Colgate-Palmolive in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Moitree Rahman, Senior Director of First-Party Data Strategy, Lilly USA in New York City. Before we begin, let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in throughout the session. Our MCs, Susie and Jeremy, along with a special guest, will return after and take your question. So let's get started. Thanks, Moitree and Echo, for joining us today. I'm going to just start with the most broad question, which is, how does Google's recent clemency for cookies affect the data ecosystem? How does it really make a big difference?
Hi, Yory. Thank you so much for having us today. I would say that with Google's recent decision to no longer prioritize rolling back cookies, it does relieve some of the concerns regarding the immediate future, but ultimately it doesn't change too much for us. We've been preparing for this cookieless future, working off of the perspective that identity is the new marketing currency, and investing in a people-centric world identity strategy so that we can thrive in that potential cookieless world. And this has involved us working to build this comprehensive views of our users through zero-party data like brand surveys, first-party data like our CRM database, and even second and third-party sources. And so now I would say that we'll just continue to develop, grow, and maximize our 1P identity and data assets, further leverage 1P unknown, all without losing out on our current cookie-based targeting options.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Moitree, have you had sort of a similar approach?
Yes, and thank you again. You're in the eMarketer team to having us. A really pleasure to talk about all the things that's going on in the advertising world from the data perspective. This discussion has been going on for a few years. Do we do it? Is it going away? It's not going away. I think in a situation like that, it does give us the opportunity to really think out of the box and really innovate at that moment. So we had been very diligently thinking about reducing our dependency on external identifiers. And frankly, the things that are probably not durable and not quite credible in all aspects. So we were thinking, what are the things that we can actually build and innovate on our side that is going to be actually more credible in terms of building that relationship with our customers, and we're not depending on external cookies and identifiers. With that, we have invested so much of our effort in building first-party data strategy, which I'm leading at Lilly. So, and again, whether it goes away tomorrow or not, looking at our comprehensive data strategy more from an internal perspective has been the key driver for us to have a more innovative mindset. And of course, this will complement with whatever we have in externally in the market, because that does impact our digital targeting strategy and all of that. So we're not losing sight of that completely, but it is more about how we can have a more robust strategy internally that complements with external identifiers. It's really the key for us.
Have you seen that translate concretely into the external targeting strategy? For sure.
Yes, for sure. One of the things that has, because we have now a more robust view of our first-party data, we kind of have more insight into our customer groups. So taking that insights and translating that in our external targeting strategy has also been a key innovation, I would say. because we're not necessarily depending on probabilistic models and all of that, but now we know more about our own customers through our own direct relationships with them. So that definitely has enriched our strategy when we think about targeting. Yeah, so that's how I would say like, it's been nicely translating with what we are seeing on our end and how we are being quickly like demonstrating that in our external targeting strategies.
How have customer data platforms helped you adapt? What has their role been?
Yeah, so customer data platforms have been a very critical add to our MarTech ecosystem, especially when you think about in today's world where privacy is paramount whenever you are dealing with customer data. So we had been looking into expanding our MarTech system by bringing in really those tools that are what we call privacy by design. And that really allows us to bring several different sets of data in one place. So we're not looking at our patients or our customers from a disjointed view. Rather, we are bringing in that digital view, offline view, the business outcome data, and all of that in one central place. So we know that what are the different stages that they're moving in from, connecting the data from disparate places in one place, and central place, I'd say. So customer data platform has been a key part of that. It has also helped us in how we shape our personalization strategy when we're taking the data back and designing their journey whenever they're interacting with us. Through our website, through our different platforms, through a variety of digital touch points. And CDP has been an instrumental part of this, building audience strategy, helping us orchestrating those personalization tactics and all of that. So I'd say it has definitely been a very big part of this changing landscape and a critical part of our MarTech ecosystem.
Yeah, I completely agree, Moitree, with what you're saying. And we've really seen that CDPs have offered that ability to unify the data across touch points, as you're saying, and really centralize it all into one platform. As the capabilities evolve in this space, we can better align our messaging with each of our consumers or customers' journey across email, SMS, web, improving that overall engagement we're delivering by giving those relevant and personalized messages and content. Another space for us, it's really redefining how we review our own media audiences. We're able to redefine our targeting to factor our messaging and our offerings to fit what people are truly needing, whether it be skin care concern or a specific item that they need to complete their skin regimen.
Makes sense. I know these more robust CDPs can also help in creating these marketing, these MMM platforms, the media mix models. How do you foresee your use of MMM evolving in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I would say we definitely see our use of MMMs evolving. Today, we have this practice in place that we're using across each of our distinct brands, really to help us better understand the impact of our marketing actions and what is driving the most effectiveness and efficiency, which I believe it's important to understand. It's not just efficiencies, it's the effectiveness of the spends that we have. So we're specifically using that data for high-level media planning and budgeting. It is, of course, critical to supplement this work with more modern ways of understanding our marketing mix, particularly with digital, and support that with more real-time learnings, with multi-touch attribution, which gives us that ability to help measure in much greater detail like how our targeting strategies or our creative is performing. But even with that, those methods don't necessarily allow us to see that bigger picture and the impact from other efforts, or if we didn't have that marketing tactic in place. But I do think it's exciting when you think about machine learning and AI processes that are really paving the way for what a new era of attribution could look like for really that full customer journey. And that's for us a quite exciting space to further explore.
Yeah, for sure. And as part of that move to MMMs, I know that some of the larger platforms offer some MMM offerings as well. I think your companies are probably big enough that you have your own way of measuring all of that. But are you using any of the are you finding that first-party data in some of these larger platforms make them more attractive as places to advertise?
Yeah. So for first party data and the availability on our partner side is also very critical. So we know that there is a richness in that data, and it's not, it's not just some probabilistic models we have, but we know that our first party audiences and they have a clear interest as well as availability and scalability in the external ad platforms that we are seeing. So that is definitely a ripe place for us to look at as we're building the audience strategies. MMMs is a very robust tool within our measurement toolkit for sure, which does help us understanding like which channel is really performing well and how can we rethink about in terms of like our budget strategy, the channel effectiveness strategy, and also now adding on top of it our audience tactics, right? So that is a very important part of the whole equation. It's not just how the channels are performing, but are we able to leverage other variables within our first party audiences that is going to actually drive a higher effectiveness. So both of these are important part of the equation. One is like when we're looking at building the audiences from a targeting perspective, are we getting the richness and the robustness in our partners platforms? Are there intersectionality between those two data sets that we have about our patients, the things that we know, as well as the publisher partners and how they are also tracking the interest and engagement on their side of the same group of audiences? And is there a nice little happy middle between those two, and which publishers are actually really garnering the highest ROI? So those are the things we look at, and MMMs are of course like really good way for us to actually assess the effectiveness and looking at our channel strategy. They help us quite a bit. They're also becoming very robust in terms of how it's we're incorporating digital touch points as well. So, the previous world was much more about, in the linear TV versus digital, but right now we're also looking at, okay, within the digital, there are a variety of channels. It's not just one, not just like website or desktop or mobile. There are a variety of social media sites and channels are there. So we're really double clicking on all of them to understand the full portfolio for channel strategy and making the right decision based on that.
Yeah, I agree. I touched on this a little bit before, but really it's a combination here and leveraging that MMM data heavily to initially decide where and how we would want to participate in different channels, and also leveraging specific measurement and verification to ensure that we're helping to improve. And we bring in our agency partners here to help us improve the sources of data verification and our measurement to let us manage our ad strategies down to smaller detail events and really prioritize how we can report on it and compare our data to benchmark data and performance to make sure that we're getting the most out of our investments.
Yeah, I mean, MMM is, notorious is probably the wrong word, but it is very high level. And it seems to me that you're able to, because you're developing, you're able to go down to more mid-level type of analysis.
Absolutely.
So obviously a lot of this relies on first-party data. MMM has a nice advantage in that it's aggregated, but still first-party data is becoming more important. How are you ensuring that you're protecting privacy and getting consumer buy-in to use all this data?
Yeah, it's important. Brands of today and tomorrow are built through the delivery of personalized consumer experiences. So we know that in today's marketing age, we really have to master that rapidly changing approaches to acquiring, retaining, managing, and mining that valuable data that's going to help inform those meaningful experiences that we're all looking to create. And this has to be done in real time, and it has to be done in a privacy safe manner, so it's super easy. But it's important at Colgate as a broader company, at CP Skin Health, we absolutely take the privacy aspect very seriously. We know that it's important to treat consumers' data with integrity, and that includes proper consent gathering, proper data handling, all the way through from capture, storage, through activation. And so further to that point, it is important to be very transparent. Part of how we seek to do that is really clearly communicating about the data that we're going to use, offering very simple opt-in or opt-out mechanisms, and for our privacy policies to be readily available. So we have that on sign-up forms or the website that our customers can easily access.
Yeah, and I would add on top of that is that that transparency piece is so critical there, because oftentimes that can become like, okay, I don't know how they're using the data, but if we give the control back to our consumers, and in terms of opting in and opting out, if there are certain communications they do not want to participate in, whether it's like email communications or maybe not being tracked anymore, and they have the opportunity to actually opt out, that gives the control back to them. So we are not necessarily just once the data is in our hand, we're not necessarily just like using it, but also allowing them to not give us the permission to maybe like non-contact for certain things, for certain programs and brands. And I think that is very important when we want to establish that credibility and transparency with our consumers. So, and for that one, adhering to the privacy compliance is also very critical. Having the right consent architecture and control architecture around using the data is actually very, very critical. And as we are looking into building our own like data architecture behind the scene, the consent piece is actually what drives how we're activating. So it's not like it is consent is sitting in one place where probably, yep, we're just checking the box, but it is actually where we start. We need to make sure that we are looking at all of our audience strategy based on people who have given us permissions, not the other way around. And that is also alleviating some of those tensions around like how the data usage and ensuring privacy compliance is in place, and also customer have the trust and the brand, because that is very key for us.
And it's not just getting permission to use that data, it's also just being able to access all the data that you have. And I know that many, especially the bigger an organization is, the more siloed sometimes that data becomes. How are you trying to remove those silos and really bring together the full force of the knowledge you have about your customers and about how they're interacting with you?
Yeah, so it goes back to like, the different channels where we collect the data. And oftentimes, if you're only looking at channel strategy, not consumer strategy, the silos happen because essentially you start looking at specific platforms, specific brands and programs, but essentially this is one customer, right? You don't want to look at the customer from different angles, because disparate data is going to lead into disparate or fragmented view of customers, and that will lead broken experience, and you don't want to do that. So we want to make sure like wherever there is silo, and wherever there is a consent, that is, again, I will probably say that more, because I want to make sure like we have the right permission to actually bring the data in. So if someone who has opted in on our side have accepted whatever the first party data agreements we have on our website, we have the consent that yes, we can actually store and use their data to enhance their experience. We also want to be very transparent into like what specific use cases their data will be used. And once we have the consent in the right place, that gives us the permission to actually relook at and reevaluate our data architecture on the behind the scene. And that's where we have done quite a bit of work over the past year or so to bring the data in one place and create that integrated view of our customers. The enterprise data lakes helps us quite a bit. So as opposed to looking at brand specific view of customers, we are shifting into more like enterprise data strategy and enterprise wide MarTech decision, so that allows us to do those data joining wherever the permissions are in place, and we have the right control architectures in order to make sure that we are looking at the joint and integrated view of our customers, and they do not live in silos. Because again, going back to data silos leading to fragmented strategy, to broken experiences, is where we want to make sure that we are actually making a responsible use of data by bringing the data in one place. CDPs, as mentioned before, is a very good tool for that very purpose as well. But before the data can be used through CDPs, there are like a lot of other upstream work that we need to do to remove the barrier that currently exists between the different data sets and data groups. But essentially, that is really where we're starting off, and also promoting a culture of data sharing and collaboration is also very important. But making sure we have the right consent and control architecture in place so that not everybody has access to that data, but it's really protected in an environment, and then also used for the right purpose. And it should be connected back to enhancing the customer experience.
And what role do things like data lakes, data seas, data oceans play in all of this?
Yeah, so as going back to the earlier point about like how where do we actually bring the data in? Because it's not just data living in a certain system, but building that enterprise data warehouse where everything is coming in, and having a really robust identity map is critical, because it's not just like some data sitting side by side and magically you are going to be seeing everybody, like all the views coming together. You have to have the robust identity strategy in place to be able to enable that, even within a data lake architecture. So that's how we're looking at disparate data sets and then joining them through a common identity structure, bringing the consent architecture, bringing all of them together in order to enable that common view of customers.
And I think it's important if you're working in an organization that's multi-brand or enterprise level to think about your tech stack strategy and your approach there, so that you can build those opportunities to have unification and consistency across the work that you're doing that Moitree was speaking about.
Speaking of tech stack and technology, how is no conversation in marketing can go without talking about generative AI. How is generative AI affecting how you're approaching analytics and targeting these days?
Yeah, so generative AI, I mean, it is becoming it is embedded in all parts of the decision making, right? So when we think about specifically about from a data and analytics perspective, a key thing for us is that how can we get the insight faster? And when we think about the variety of data we currently get, whether it's structured, unstructured, whether it's like text, whether it's like qualitative data, quantitative data, the variety is so much is that it's hard for us to actually get to that insight at a speed to respond to our customer demand. So what we are looking at is that how can we embed this generative AI capabilities with large language models for us to actually sift through that at a rapid speed, so we can actually get the insight faster, run experimentations faster, and see like where there's an opportunity for incrementality in business outcome. So that's where how we are experimenting quite a bit in the data space, as we're looking into dealing with variety of data. Data quality can be an issue as well, where we're seeing like how these newer advanced capabilities can help us get to decision faster.
Yeah, I think this is a really exciting space in general. At part of our organization at the enterprise level, it's a space that we're really leaning into. And our approach, by and large, has been on building an internal AI suite that we can be comfortable and a safe place for us to all work in. And it's really been about continuing to iterate and develop and test and learn what can be done with these tools and the power of these tools. Yeah, it's really, really been an exciting space and I can't wait to see the future of when you have the right parameters in place to unlock the ability and the future potential with AI.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, one of the things I've noticed in my own research in this area is just that, it just opens up the analytics to a broader group of people, just by making much simpler just to interact with these data sets. And also, as you mentioned, the increased speed of insights, you can start doing things like, more iterative incrementality studies, more, faster analysis on these really complex new models. So a lot of options are opened up.
So many options, and clearly, a lot of oversight needed, but the ability to get from A to B much quicker and then to work with that data in a different way, it allows us to spend our time in the right places.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm sure we're all going to be talking a lot more about generative AI in the next year. One area that I've noticed some impact from generative AI is in contextual advertising and contextual targeting. What have been, what have you seen in this area? Has contextual targeting actually moved forward as a result of some of these innovations? Are you seeing it as a more appealing option for your companies?
Yeah, I mean, we first of all, we like to keep that mentality of test and learn, and maybe what worked in the past won't work today, and vice versa. But we have been bringing more and more contextual advertising into our marketing mix, and we are starting to see some positive results in that space. For us, we're leveraging it in places through our partnerships, like a partnership with consumer publications. And that really plays an important role in driving attention and consideration. And we're ensuring that we're choosing partners that align with our target audiences to avoid, some potential pitfalls that could be around the space of contextual. And when we think about, how this could be further innovated, there's been some examples that we've used with our audiences with sponsorships that have helped us increase visibility through placements in areas like sunscreen portals for our sun-centric brand LTMD that we're see great responses to. And we'll definitely be leveraging newer opportunities as we head into 2025 to take these efforts to the next level with things like interactive native articles, shoppable ads and units, and quizzes that can be placed alongside relevant content. And if you think about why is it not more widespread, potentially it is less accurate targeting. You're not using that personalized data, so it may not be as effective in reaching your ideal consumers. However, I would say with privacy and cookie concerns and this ever evolving space, I believe it's worth marketers to continue to explore as part of their broader media strategy.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see, its impact on brand safety, both in terms of negative targeting, so you have a better sense of what not to target against, but also, targeting places that are blocked for brand safety reasons now, but actually could be good places to advertise. I think that's one area where generative AI is going to really help with that. I think why don't we wrap up here? Echo and Moitree, thanks again for a really great conversation. I really appreciated the time that we just had and the conversation we just had. And over to you, Susie and Jeremy.
Thanks so much, Yory. Another hot topic and so much to dig into. We're back and we have another special guest with us, Paul Verna, eMarketer's VP of Content, joining us all the way from Maine. Hey, Paul.
Hey, great to see you guys. Great to be here, or here, not where you guys are.
We're so happy to have you. Before we get started with the questions that we got for this session, we've gotten some really great ones, but we've also been asked a logistical one, which is, will we be able to get the links for the recordings? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So everybody listening in, if you have other questions, definitely put them in the chat and we'll get to our first one. Paul, are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm going to be, which does not mean that I'm actually ready.
Jeremy, are you ready?
Let's do this. And Paul is modest, by the way. Can we
Yeah,
try
bring
this
it
for
on,
Paul?
bring it on.
It's not going to happen, but
I
let's
don't
try.
think we can. I'm going to start with the first one. While we are moving away from last click attribution, how is the media mix modeling panning out?
Well, so Yory talked about the joint survey that we did with Snap, and in that survey of marketers, media mix modeling was actually very highly rated as a barometer of uh, identifying drivers or of business value or identifying outcomes. I think it was like 30% of respondents thought that you could really trust MMM. So I see it as a little bit of like everything old is new again, not unlike contextual targeting, which Echo referred to in the session, where there's just, because of what started with cookies being deprecated, which of course now is kind of, its own topic. So even though it's not happening according to the original plan, there was definitely a push to find non-cookie alternative ways of targeting. And I think, MMM helps in that regard, as does contextual. And I think the other thing that's important about an MMM is that it is inherently privacy safe and it requires a lot of technology to really work. So those two factors make it, or the technology piece makes it tailor-made for AI, and the privacy piece makes it tailor-made for the times we are living in.
That's awesome. It's good to hear that AI can help solve for that, because sometimes, at least on the retail side, when you hear tech, high tech needs, you start thinking about dollars and all the investments you have to make.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I know you guys are covering this area a little bit too. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously measurements. It's always been a hot topic, but I think part of the challenge here is that it's become a bit more complicated, as Paul, alluded to. The cookie list, like when will they be entirely phased out? Will that ever happen? Who knows? But I think that people have increasingly, marketers have moved towards accumulating more data. And then the tricky thing is making sense of it all, right?
Yeah.
Because I've seen a number of different high-profile initiatives in order to develop partnerships where you can just put data together with other data points that you didn't have, and then you have contextual clues that allow you to put your targeting dollars in the right place.
Yeah.
But whether or not you're going to be entirely successful with that remains to be seen. So I think that we're going to see a lot more movement in the space over the next few years.
Right. Well, you guys both said it. There's a lot of different kinds of data. And one of the questions we had was around the relative value. So I don't know if we need to start from defining them, or we just move right into what is the relative value of zero party versus first party versus second party versus third party data. And how do you think about the different components?
Yeah, I mean, again, turning to some survey data, and this is from Funnel and Raven Research. First-party data is still the king of the hill. This was a survey of worldwide marketers and the steps they're taking to adapt to a cookieless future. 80% identified first-party data. It was by far the biggest bucket, that they responded to. Zero-party data, 31%. Second-party data partnerships, 11%. So it's really all about having that data. Where it comes from, I think, is secondary, but obviously very important to verify and to weave that whole thread of, who is this person you're trying to target and what data do you have on them. But I think it's still a world in which first-party data is critical. I think, Susie, because you inhabit the world of retail media, that's been one of the big drivers in retail media advertising. Certainly not exclusive to retail media, but very important there.
Right.
So, data is king. First-party data is, high up on that hierarchy. But, the way I look at it is a party's a party and any party is good. So
that is true. The more parties we have, the better. And I think truly it is about how do you string all that data together and how can you really have a 360 view of the customer. For us, we also talk a lot about zero party data that you get usually through loyalty. It's the data parts and pieces that a retailer or another brand has based on what the consumer is willing to give them that might actually set you apart. If you have a really strong loyalty program, it might set you apart. And it's what the retail media networks are using to then funnel their business as well.
You know, by the way, what's really interesting, I think, about this area to both of you is that the consumer, and we've seen data around this, the consumer has gotten more sophisticated, so they understand that their data is very valuable, which means there needs to be like a real value exchange. If you're going to give up your information, you want to know how it's going to be used. You want to make sure that you're getting something in exchange for that. And I feel like that's been a bit of a shift, that the consumer is more aware of that, as opposed to like the analyst and the brand side marketers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of subtle shift, I think one of these questions that we got was quite interesting in terms of its subtlety around where does targeting and retargeting overlap? Does it overlap? How do we think about that?
I mean, I think they are starting to overlap. I think we're in a world in which so many lines are blurring, and that is one of them. And that's simply because there's so many touch points now and so many devices and so many places where consumers are interacting with brands. And the more the brands start to realize what those connectivity points are, the more it kind of like gets a little bit more into that retargeting. So when you're targeting someone, you don't know who they are. When you're retargeting someone, they've already engaged with you. But in that first step of not knowing who the customer is, it's possible that once you stitch together the data, you actually do know more about them than you thought you did. So
yeah,
I think that's where I wouldn't say that the two are totally collapsed, but there's definitely less of a clear distinction between them.
By the way, Paul, didn't Yory actually put together a report on Gen AI for targeting recently? Because I think that's obviously AI is in some ways smushing it's a technical term, guys, smushing, but taking these worlds and putting them a little bit closer together than they ever had been before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's becoming the great equalizer and leveler of so many functions that had previously been, separate and siloed and are now starting to coalesce.
One of the things that I think is tricky, though, on the overlap piece is that not everybody has the conversion data. So that's why sometimes we see the retargeting that's lingering through Words with Friends and other games or other places where you are, because that retailer doesn't actually know. They know who you are maybe, but they don't know if you actually made the purchase. And I feel like that's one of the friction points for me as a consumer that makes me understand where this question is coming from. Like, how do we move away from that?
Yeah, and I think Jeremy made a great point about the increasing sophistication of consumers. Some of this comes from just a barrage of media coverage, calling into question the business practices of the big, the big tech firms. Some of it just comes from being bombarded with messages about, opting into cookies, which makes you think about it on a different level. And yes, I think consumers are more sophisticated and more circumspect about giving up that data because they realize it's valuable.
Right. And you guys are seeing a lot of examples of that too right now in the news.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think it's certainly really interesting, given that we're covering the news cycle and looking at certain regions that have more strict privacy laws, and how much of that is going to come over to the U.S., where a lot of our coverage is based. Generally, regions like Europe tend to be a bit ahead of the U.S. So it's going to be really interesting to keep covering this.
Paul, any final thoughts as you think about how AI comes together in terms of targeting, and what are some of the agencies thinking about, like a quick rapid fire final thought?
Yeah, just one quick thought about, again, blurring lines. So agencies are typically structured in a very, very general sense. They have their creative, department and then the media side of the business. So I think what's happening with AI is both of those are starting to meld together more, because you really can't have the personalization and the targeting without more sophistication on the creative side, with things like, customizing ads or having different versions that you can deploy instantly because AI has helped you, A, create them, and B, know when to, to push those buttons. So I think we're definitely going to see more confluence and less siloing.
And I think that's across probably every industry and every function. And so next up, we actually have more to talk about AI. Mountain's Lauren Reedy will have a deep dive discussion with eMarketer's Henry Powderly on CTV and AI. Join Lauren and Henry by clicking on Next Session above the chat on your right. And don't forget, you might need to refresh your browser. We'll be back soon for our final thoughts and take more of your live questions. You won't want to miss it.